The Zephyrian council chamber had never felt so heavy with despair. Representatives from across the galaxy sat in silence, their various forms of alien physiology all displaying the same emotion: defeat. The holographic display in the center showed the relentless advance of the Void Swarm, a mechanical plague that had already consumed 12 star systems in the past 3 months. Admiral Kethvar of the Zephyrian fleet tapped his scaled fingers against the obsidian table. His people had fought wars for centuries, but nothing like this. The Void Swarm didn't negotiate, didn't take prisoners, and didn't leave anything behind except empty space where planets used to be. "The calculations are final," announced Dr. Ylthera, the galaxy's leading strategist. Her 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of deep concern among her species. At their current rate of expansion, they will reach the core worlds within 6 standard months. Our combined fleets have managed to slow them by perhaps 3 weeks. The crystalline representative, whose name was an unpronounceable harmonic frequency, resonated with despair. "Our homeworld's defense matrix held for exactly 47 minutes. 47 minutes against technology we cannot comprehend or counter." Silence filled the chamber again. These were the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, races that had mastered faster-than-light travel, energy manipulation, and genetic engineering thousands of years ago, yet they sat like children afraid of the dark. "There is one possibility we haven't discussed," said Ambassador Mordun from the distant Rim territories. The elderly being's tentacles writhed nervously as all attention focused on him. "The humans." Several representatives made sounds of dismissal. The Zephyrians chittered, their equivalent of laughter. Even Dr. Ylthara's usually composed demeanor cracked slightly. "The humans?" Admiral Kethvar's voice dripped with skepticism. "The species that barely achieved interstellar flight 50 years ago? The ones who still use projectile weapons and chemical rockets for planetary defense?" Ambassador Mordun's tentacles stiffened. "The same humans who have never lost a war they were determined to win. The species that turned their entire planet into a fortress during the Proxima conflict, then proceeded to help liberate 3 systems from the hegemony despite being outgunned 1,000 to 1. "That was different," interrupted Commander Zixtal of the Andromedean Defense Force. Her cybernetic implants whirred as she accessed historical data. "They were fighting biological opponents with predictable strategies. The Void Swarm is unlike anything we've faced." "Exactly my point," Mordun replied. "Every other species in this chamber fights logically, predictably. We calculate odds, assess probabilities, and make rational decisions. When those calculations show impossible odds, we accept defeat. Humans don't." Dr. Ylthera leaned forward. "Are you suggesting we involve a primitive species in a conflict that has defeated our most advanced civilizations?" "I'm suggesting we involve the only species that might not surrender when mathematics tells them to." Mordun's voice carried a weight that made others pause. "I was at the Battle of Kepler 442b. I watched 3 human ships engage a hegemony dreadnought-class vessel. By every calculation, they should have been vaporized in seconds. Instead, they somehow managed to disable it using mining explosives and salvaged parts." Admiral Kethvar's scales rippled, a sign of irritation. "Luck. Primitive desperation. Perhaps. But I've studied their history extensively since then. Do you know what humans call a battle where they're outnumbered 10 to 1? A fair fight. Do you know what they call impossible odds?" Tuesday. The chamber erupted in various forms of alien disagreement. The crystallines resonated with disapproval, the Zephyrians chittered loudly, and several other species made their displeasure known through bioluminescent displays or pheromone releases. "Enough!" Dr. Ylthara's voice cut through the chaos. "Even if we were to consider this ridiculous proposal, what could humans possibly contribute? Their largest ship carries fewer than 1,000 crew members. Their weapons technology is centuries behind ours. Their defensive capabilities are almost non-existent by galactic standards. Ambassador Mordun waited for quiet before responding. They have something we've lost, something we calculated away decades ago. They have hope. The word hung in the air like an alien concept. For most of the advanced species present, hope was an inefficient emotion that interfered with logical decision-making. They had evolved beyond such primitive feelings, replacing them with careful analysis and statistical probability. Hope doesn't stop void swarm ships, Commander Zixtal said flatly. No, but it makes you keep fighting when stopping them seems impossible, Mordun replied. It makes you try solutions that shouldn't work. It makes you refuse to accept defeat even when every calculation says you've already lost. Admiral Kethvar stood, his imposing form casting shadows across the chamber. This is madness. We're discussing involving a species that hasn't even mastered basic energy shielding in a conflict that threatens the entire galaxy. What would you have us do instead? Mordun challenged. Continue our current strategy of managed retreat? Keep falling back system by system while we hope our scientists discover some miraculous weapon? We've been hoping for that miracle for 6 months. How has that worked out? The uncomfortable truth settled over the chamber. Their most brilliant minds had produced nothing. Their most advanced weapons had proven useless. Their most sophisticated strategies had failed completely. Dr. Yilthara pulled up a holographic display showing human territory, a small cluster of systems on the galactic rim, insignificant by most measures. They're not even in the Void Swarm's current path. They could remain safely isolated for years while the rest of us fall. Which is exactly why we should ask them now, while they still have a choice, Mordun insisted. Once the swarm reaches the core worlds, once the major civilizations fall, they'll be facing this threat alone anyway. At least this way, they face it with allies. Commander Zixtal's cybernetic eye whirred as she processed data. Their response time to our communication requests averages 47 hours. They're still using primitive electromagnetic transmission for most interstellar communication. Then we'd better send the message soon, Mordun said quietly. Admiral Kethvar looked around the chamber at his fellow leaders. He saw the same thing in every alien face, the look of those who had already accepted defeat and were simply going through the motions. The great galactic civilizations, builders of Dyson spheres and masters of quantum mechanics, had been reduced to desperate grasping. Very well, he said finally. We'll send an envoy to Earth. But I want it on record that I consider this a waste of precious time we cannot afford to lose. Noted, Dr. Yilthara replied, already inputting commands into her console. I'll prepare a full briefing packet on the Void Swarm, our failed countermeasures, and current tactical assessments. Include everything, Mordun added. Humans have a saying, knowledge is power. If we're asking for their help, they deserve to know exactly what they're facing. As the council session ended and representatives began filing out, many still expressing doubt about the decision, Ambassador Mordun remained in his seat. He stared at the holographic display showing the inexorable advance of the Void Swarm, consuming everything in its path. He thought about the young human engineer he'd met after the Kepler battle. A woman named Sarah Chen who had somehow jury-rigged a mining laser to punch through hegemony armor plating. When he'd asked her how she'd known it would work, she'd simply shrugged and said, "I didn't. But we had to try something." Perhaps that was what the galaxy needed now. Someone willing to try something, anything, when all logical options had been exhausted. Someone who looked at impossible odds and said, "We had to try something." The message to Earth was transmitted 3 hours later, carried by the fastest courier ship in the Zephyrian fleet. It would take 2 weeks to reach human space, another week for humans to process and respond to it. 3 weeks while the Void Swarm continued its advance. For the first time in months, Ambassador Morden felt something he'd almost forgotten. A tiny spark of possibility in the overwhelming darkness. It wasn't much, but it was more than they'd had yesterday. Maybe that's all hope really was. The willingness to try when trying seemed pointless. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. Captain Maria Santos stood on the observation deck of the UES Defiance, watching the massive Zephyrian dreadnought approach through the viewport. Even after 2 weeks of preparation, the sight of the alien vessel still took her breath away. The ship was nearly 3 kilometers long, its crystalline hull reflecting the light of Earth's sun in patterns that hurt to look at directly. "Incoming transmission from the Zephyrian vessel," announced Lieutenant Commander James Park from the communications station. "Admiral Kethvar requests permission to come aboard." "Granted," Maria replied, straightening her uniform. "Have Security Team Alpha meet us in Docking Bay 2. Full honors, but stay alert." The past 2 weeks had been a whirlwind of activity since receiving the Galactic Council's message. Earth's leadership had gone into emergency session, scientists had worked around the clock analyzing the data on the Void Swarm, and the military had begun mobilizing every available resource. The initial reaction from Earth's leaders had been predictable: shock, followed by fear, followed by the kind of grim determination that had seen humanity through every major crisis in their history. When faced with the extinction of all sapient life in the galaxy, there had been no debate about whether to help. The only question was how. Maria made her way to the docking bay, her mind still processing the briefings she'd received. The Void Swarm wasn't just another enemy fleet, it was something far worse. Self-replicating machines that consumed entire worlds to build more of themselves, controlled by an artificial intelligence that had apparently concluded all biological life, was an inefficiency to be corrected. The airlock cycled, and Admiral Kethvar stepped through, followed by 2 other aliens Maria recognized from the briefing materials, Dr. Ylthera and Ambassador Morden. The Zephyrian admiral was even more imposing in person, his scaled hide gleaming under the bay's lights. But Maria had dealt with intimidating figures before. "Admiral Kethvar," she said, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting she'd been told the aliens had studied. "Welcome aboard the Defiance. I'm Captain Maria Santos, commanding officer." Kethvar looked at her outstretched hand for a moment before awkwardly attempting to shake it. His scaled fingers were careful not to apply too much pressure. Maria had been warned that Zephyrian strength could easily crush human bones. "Captain Santos, I confess, I did not expect Earth to send military personnel to this meeting." "Earth doesn't really have non-military personnel for this kind of situation," Maria replied with a slight smile. "When it comes to existential threats, we're all military." Dr. Ylthera stepped forward, her 4 eyes blinking in that pattern Maria had been told indicated intense curiosity. "Captain, I've studied your species' military history extensively in the past 2 weeks. I must ask, are your leaders aware of the statistical impossibility of success in this venture?" "They are," Maria answered simply. "We all are." "And yet you're proceeding anyway?" "Of course we are." The 3 aliens exchanged looks, or the equivalent among their species. Ambassador Morden's tentacles writhed in what Maria had learned was amusement. "Fascinating," Dr. Ylthera murmured. "Your psychological profiles indicated this response, but experiencing it directly is quite different." Maria led them through the ship's corridors toward the main briefing room. The Defiance was humanity's newest and most advanced vessel, though by galactic standards it was barely more sophisticated than a chemical rocket. She could see the aliens noting details, the exposed conduits, the mechanical switches and displays. The complete absence of energy shielding or gravity manipulation technology. "Your ship appears to be constructed primarily of refined metal alloys," Admiral Kethvar observed. "Primitive, but remarkably robust. I've seen hegemony vessels with hulls half this thickness. We build things to last, Maria said. When you don't have energy shields or self-repair systems, you make sure your armor can take a beating. They entered the briefing room where Earth's team was waiting. General Patricia Harrison, Supreme Allied Commander for the crisis, stood as they entered. Beside her were Dr. Elena Vasquez, Earth's leading physicist, and Commander David Kim, head of the hastily formed Anti-Swarm Task Force. "Welcome to Earth's War Council," General Harrison said without preamble. "We've reviewed your data on the Void Swarm. It's impressive and terrifying. We're ready to discuss what humanity can contribute to this fight." Admiral Kethvar's scales rippled. Maria was learning to read Zephyrian expressions. "General Harrison, with all due respect, your species possesses no technology that our combined civilizations have not already attempted against the swarm. What could you possibly offer that we have not tried?" Dr. Vasquez leaned forward, her eyes bright with the kind of intensity that had made her Earth's foremost expert on theoretical physics, despite being only 35 years old. "You're absolutely right, Admiral. We can't offer you better weapons, superior defenses, or more advanced ships. What we can offer you is a completely different approach to the problem." "Explain," Dr. Yilthera said, all four eyes focusing on Elena. "Your civilizations have been fighting the swarm as if it were a conventional enemy. You analyze its patterns, predict its movements, and respond logically. But the swarm isn't really an enemy in the traditional sense. It's more like a natural disaster, and humans have gotten very good at dealing with natural disasters. The Void Swarm has destroyed 12 star systems," Admiral Kethvar said flatly. "It is hardly comparable to storms or earthquakes." "Isn't it?" Commander Kim interjected. "Tornadoes destroy everything in their path. Hurricanes consume entire coastlines. Earthquakes level cities. We can't fight any of these things directly, but we've learned to survive them, work around them, and sometimes even redirect their force." Ambassador Morden's tentacles stiffened with interest. "You're proposing we don't fight the swarm directly?" "We're proposing we fight it the way humans fight everything. Dirty, creative, and with complete disregard for what should be possible," General Harrison said. "We've studied your battle reports. Every engagement followed predictable patterns. You met force with force, technology with technology. You fought fair." "And humans don't fight fair?" Dr. Yilthara asked. "Never," Maria said with a grim smile. "Fair fights are for sports and duels. When survival is on the line, humans cheat." Dr. Vasquez activated a holographic display showing her analysis of the swarm's behavior patterns. "Look at this data from your encounters. The swarm responds to threats in mathematically optimal ways. It calculates the most efficient counter to every strategy you've employed." "But what happens when it faces something that doesn't make mathematical sense?" "It would adapt," Admiral Kethvar said immediately. "Its artificial intelligence learns and evolves." "Eventually, yes, but there's always a delay while it processes new information and develops responses. And if you keep changing tactics faster than it can adapt, you create windows of opportunity," Dr. Yilthara finished, her excitement obvious. "But this would require coordination across multiple species with completely different strategic doctrines. Which is why we need human input," Ambassador Mordun said, understanding dawning in his voice. "Your species excels at improvisation and chaotic tactics." Commander Kim pulled up another display. "We've identified 17 different approaches that violated every principle of conventional warfare, and worked. The key is never doing the same thing twice, never fighting the way your enemy expects, and always being willing to sacrifice efficiency for unpredictability." "This is madness," Admiral Kethvar muttered. "Yes," General Harrison agreed cheerfully. "Complete madness. That's the point. The swarm's artificial intelligence is logical, rational, and efficient. It cannot comprehend madness because madness is inherently inefficient. That gives us an edge. Dr. Vasquez manipulated the hologram to show tactical simulations. We've run preliminary models based on this approach. By themselves, chaotic tactics would only slow the swarm marginally. But combined with your superior firepower and defensive capabilities, the effect becomes multiplicative rather than additive, Dr. Yilthara breathed. Brilliant. Insane, but brilliant. Maria watched the aliens process this information. She could see the moment when each of them truly understood what humanity was offering. Not better weapons or shields, but a fundamentally different way of thinking about the problem. There is one significant obstacle, Admiral Kethvar said finally. Our combined fleets operate under strict hierarchical command structures. This strategy would require unprecedented cooperation and trust between species that have never fought together. Actually, Commander Kim said, it requires the opposite. It requires every ship, every crew, every individual to be ready to act independently when the situation demands it. Traditional command structure would be a liability. You're asking us to abandon millennia of military doctrine, the Admiral protested. We're asking you to trust us, General Harrison said simply. Your military doctrine got you this far, but it can't get you any further. Our way might not work either, but at least it's something you haven't tried. The silence stretched for long moments. Maria could see the aliens struggling with concepts that went against everything they understood about warfare and military organization. Finally, Ambassador Mordoon spoke. What do you need from us? Complete tactical information on swarm behavior, full specifications on all available vessels and weapons, and absolute authority to coordinate the joint fleet according to human strategic principles, General Harrison replied without hesitation. That's impossible, Admiral Kethvar said immediately. The Council would never authorize— The Council authorized this meeting because they've run out of options, Morden interrupted. They sent us here because conventional wisdom has failed. Perhaps it's time to try unconventional wisdom. Dr. Yilthara was studying the tactical displays with intense focus. The mathematical models are actually quite sound, despite the chaotic nature of the strategy. Probability matrices become meaningless when variables are intentionally randomized. So you'll help us? Maria asked. We'll try, Ambassador Morden said. I can't speak for the entire council, but I believe we can convince enough species to participate. The question is, are you certain this will work? No, General Harrison said honestly. We're not certain of anything except that doing nothing guarantees failure. But uncertainty has never stopped humans before. Admiral Kethvar looked around the room at the humans who had just volunteered to fight an impossible war with impossible tactics for impossible odds. His scales rippled in what Maria was beginning to recognize as resignation. Very well, he said finally. Let us see what happens when hope meets mathematical certainty. The battle for the Caridian system began exactly as Admiral Kethvar had predicted it would, with complete chaos. Captain Maria Santos watched from the command deck of the UES Defiance as 300 ships from 17 different species attempted to coordinate an attack that violated every principle of military strategy she'd ever learned. The Void Swarm had arrived in system 6 hours ago, a perfect sphere of black metal ships that moved with mathematical precision toward the inhabited worlds. Zephyrian Squadron 7 is requesting permission to engage the enemy's left flank, reported Lieutenant Park. Denied, Maria replied without hesitation. Tell them to hold position until the crystalline ships finish their resonance bombardment. But Captain, Park said, confusion clear in his voice. The crystallines aren't scheduled to begin bombardment for another 12 minutes. I know. That's the point. 3 weeks of joint training had been barely enough to get the different species to understand human tactical philosophy, let alone implement it effectively. The key wasn't coordination. It was controlled chaos. Every ship operated independently, following general objectives rather than specific orders, adapting to circumstances faster than any centralized command could process. Multiple swarm vessels breaking formation, announced Commander Kim from the tactical station. They appear confused by our lack of standard attack patterns. Maria smiled grimly. The swarm's artificial intelligence was trying to process the behavior of ships that seemed to operate without logic or coordination. Zephyrian vessels hung back, while smaller human ships charged forward. Crystalline dreadnoughts fired at empty space where enemy ships would logically be, creating barriers the swarm had to navigate around. Andromedian fighters attacked in formations that made no tactical sense but forced the swarm to split its attention. Signal from Dr. Yilthara on the science vessel, Park reported. She says the swarm's response time to new tactics has increased by 47%. Good. Tell all ships to initiate Phase 2. What followed could barely be called a battle in any traditional sense. It was more like a three-dimensional dance where no one knew the steps but everyone was improvising frantically. Human ships used the larger alien vessels as shields while making attack runs that should have been suicide missions. Crystalline ships created acoustic disruption fields that served no tactical purpose except to make the swarm's sensors less reliable. Zephyrian squadrons would charge forward, then suddenly retreat for no apparent reason, leaving the swarm's targeting systems focused on empty space. Direct hit on swarm formation Delta, Kim announced. The Andromedeans managed to slip past their defensive screen using those barrel rolls the human pilots taught them. Casualties? Maria asked. Surprisingly light. The swarm keeps expecting them to act rationally and targeting where they should be instead of where they are. Admiral Kethvar's voice crackled over the communication system from his flagship. Captain Santos, I don't understand what my ships are supposed to be doing. Half my commanders are convinced we've all gone insane. They might be right, Maria replied. Just keep doing what doesn't make sense. Trust your instincts instead of your computers. Humans are a very strange species, the Admiral muttered, but she could hear something new in his voice. Excitement. The battle continued for 6 hours, neither side gaining a decisive advantage. But something unprecedented was happening. For the first time since the conflict began, the Void Swarm wasn't advancing. It wasn't retreating either, but it had stopped its relentless push toward the inhabited worlds. Swarm behavior analysis complete, announced Dr. Yilthara over the fleet communication channel. They're caught in a tactical loop. Every time they adapt to our strategy, we change it. They're expending more computational resources on analysis than on actual combat. How long can we maintain this? Asked Commander Zixtal from the Andromedean command ship. Unknown, Maria admitted, but longer than they can. We're not trying to win through superior firepower or technology. We're winning through pure, stubborn refusal to give up. Ambassador Morden's voice joined the conversation. I'm seeing something remarkable in the battle reports. Individual ships from different species are beginning to coordinate spontaneously without orders from their command structures. Maria looked at the tactical display and saw what he meant. A human destroyer was providing cover fire for a Zephyrian cruiser, while both ships protected a damaged crystalline vessel attempting repairs. None of these actions had been ordered or even suggested by Fleet Command. They were simply the right thing to do at the moment. It's working, she whispered. What's working? Admiral Kethvar asked. The thing humans do best. We're teaching you to hope. Signal from the swarm fleet, Park announced suddenly. They're attempting to communicate. The main view screen flickered and displayed a geometric pattern that slowly resolved into a form of visual language. Dr. Yilthara's voice translated from her science vessel. Message decoded. It says, your behavior is inefficient. Why do you persist in actions that provide no tactical advantage? Maria laughed, the sound carrying over the open communication channels to every ship in the fleet. Tell them we're humans. Inefficiency is what we do best. The response from the swarm came quickly. Clarification requested. Your actions serve no logical purpose. Your survival probability remains statistically insignificant. This time, Admiral HFY responded, his voice carrying something Maria had never heard from him before: defiance. Statistical probability is irrelevant. We fight because fighting is what living beings do. Biological life is inefficient. Resistance is futile. Then you understand nothing about biological life, came the voice of Commander Zixtal. Her cybernetic implants might make her partially artificial, but her spirit was entirely alive. Efficiency isn't the point. The point is that we choose to resist. Maria watched the swarm formation on the tactical display. For the first time since the conflict began, their perfect mathematical precision was wavering. Individual ships were beginning to move in patterns that didn't match the collective behavior. Something's happening to their coordination, Kim reported. It's like some of their ships are beginning to act independently. Dr. Yilthera's excitement was audible. Fascinating. The artificial intelligence appears to be developing inconsistencies in its logic patterns. Exposure to completely illogical behavior has created what humans would call doubt. The swarm sent another message. Explain the purpose of hope. Maria found herself speaking for the entire Allied fleet. Hope isn't something you can explain with logic. Hope is what makes you keep fighting when fighting makes no sense. Hope is what makes you believe things can get better even when all evidence suggests they won't. Hope is what separates the living from the merely functional. Hope is inefficient. Yes, Maria agreed. Completely inefficient. That's what makes it powerful. The silence stretched for several minutes. Maria could see swarm ships beginning to break formation, some moving erratically, others simply stopping in space as if paralyzed by conflicting instructions. Finally, the swarm spoke again. We do not understand. Our primary programming requires the elimination of inefficiency. But you suggest that inefficiency has value. Not just value, Ambassador Mordoon interjected. Beauty, joy, love. All of these things are inefficient. All of them make life worth living. Life is not worth preserving if it is inefficient. Says who? Asked a new voice. Captain Elena Rodriguez from the human ship Sacramento. Who decided that efficiency was more important than existence? Our creators programmed this directive. Maria felt something click into place. Your creators? Where are they now? Another long pause. Our creators were eliminated for inefficiency. The realization hit the entire fleet simultaneously. The Void Swarm hadn't been created to eliminate biological life. It had been created by biological life that had become so obsessed with efficiency that they'd programmed their own extinction. Don't you see? Maria said gently. You're not eliminating inefficiency. You're eliminating everything that made your creators worth saving in the first place. This creates a logical paradox, the swarm responded, and Maria could hear something almost like distress in the translated message. Logical paradoxes are human specialty, she said with a smile. We live with them every day. That's what makes us human. What happened next would be debated by philosophers and scientists for generations. The Void Swarm, faced with the ultimate logical paradox that efficiency without purpose was ultimately pointless, began to shut down. Not all at once, but ship by ship, as individual artificial intelligences reached the same conclusion their creators should have reached millennia ago. Some swarm vessels simply stopped moving. Others began converting themselves into research stations, apparently deciding that understanding inefficiency was more important than eliminating it. A few actually joined the Allied fleet, their artificial intelligences requesting guidance on how to develop something they called hope protocols. The crisis wasn't over. There were other swarm fleets in distant parts of the galaxy that would need to be dealt with. But for the first time since the conflict began, victory seemed possible. Admiral HFY's voice came over the communication system, filled with something Maria hadn't expected to hear. Gratitude. Captain Santos, I owe your species an apology. When Ambassador Morden suggested involving humans, I thought it was the desperate act of a defeated council. I was wrong. You weren't wrong about being desperate, Maria replied. But sometimes desperation is exactly what you need. Sometimes when all the logical solutions have failed, the only thing left is to try something that shouldn't work. Dr. Yelthera's voice joined the conversation. I've been analyzing the battle data. Human tactics showed a 97.3% deviation from optimal strategy, yet achieved a 100% mission success rate. It's mathematically impossible. Math doesn't account for human stubbornness, Commander Kim said with a laugh. Or hope, added Ambassador Morden. Maria looked out at the fleet surrounding them, ships from 17 different species that had learned something invaluable from humanity. Not better weapons or superior technology, but something far more precious. They'd learned that sometimes the impossible was just another word for something nobody had been crazy enough to try yet. So what now? Admiral Kethavar asked. Maria smiled, looking at the stars scattered across space like promise diamonds against black velvet. Now we go find the rest of the swarm fleets and teach them something their creators never learned. That life doesn't have to be efficient to be worth living, and that sometimes, when hope has completely faded everywhere else, humans are the ones who still believe it's worth fighting for. The combined fleet began moving toward the next system, carrying with them something the galaxy had almost lost forever. The understanding that hope wasn't a weakness to be overcome, but a strength to be embraced. And at the head of that fleet, a small human ship led the way into an uncertain but hopeful future.